I call to order the July 24th, 2017 regular business meeting of City Council. Mr. Hamp, will you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
Yes, sir, I will. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Mr. Hamp. I'll remind those in attendance tonight, if you wish to speak during citizens' comment or the public hearings, or sign-up sheets in the back of the room. First item of business is consideration of the consent agenda. Is there a motion to adopt the consent agenda as presented?
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Marks. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Freeman. Is there any discussion? If not, all in favor of adopting the consent agenda, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carries 4-0. Number 3 is concerns of city council people. Anybody have anything you'd like to add tonight?
Do you have something there?
I do.
Go ahead.
Well, I have a couple of things. One, just sort of for conversation either this evening or otherwise, but kind of to pitch an idea to my colleagues here. We'll have a discussion about, we've had a couple of instances already where we've had some reappointments to commissions and committees that represent and inform council on important issues throughout the city. And I know we've talked about this in the past. Would really think it's important to maybe reimagine some of these commissions and their functions, and develop mission statements for each one, and kind of reimagine them where necessary or prudent to consolidate those committees. The idea here being that we have, I think we are so fortunate, I think everyone would agree, we're very fortunate that in the last couple of planning commission vacancies, we've been, I don't want to say inundated, but very well represented in terms of citizen interest. And obviously the planning commission is out front and very prominent and present in our government, and would love to see that in sort of our other commissions. And so with that, I was curious if we could maybe get a consensus tonight, if it's prudent, Mr. Mayor, to maybe work with staff over the next couple of months, and maybe by our first meeting in September, present some concepts of restructuring and reimagining.
I don't know if we'll be able to get it done that fast, but yes, I think we should.
Maybe by the 1st of October or something.
It'd be something to look at for sure. I don't know about consensus tonight or anything, but yeah, sure, we could look at it.
Always good for discussion.
Sure.
Absolutely.
Next is, let my colleagues know that I attended the Virginia Municipal League. Of course, the city is a member of the Virginia Municipal League, which is a body represented out of Richmond that has a makeup of elected officials and city managers from all over the Commonwealth. And I attended our first committee meeting for the Human Development and Education Committee, Policy Committee, for the upcoming legislative session in Richmond. And I would just share that it was great. 5 hours of really, really interesting and important things that affect not just the Commonwealth, but specifically here in Waynesboro, from opioid addiction to the disconnect in state funding for schools, specifically capital cost. And so just really important work. So I thought I'd just share that. Was really interesting. And then lastly, we have our comprehensive plan steering committee meeting tomorrow evening here in the council chambers at 7 o'clock. And I think the consultants are planning on giving a kind of a brief update on the draft plan that they've kind of developed based off of the many interactions that we've had with our neighbors throughout the city. That's at 7 o'clock tomorrow, and so the public certainly is welcome and invited to participate in that. And that's all I have this evening, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you.
And I would like to say, remind everyone that my first Monday will be next month, 2 weeks, the 7th of August. So if anyone has any comments they'd like to bring and share, ask questions, whatever, I'll be happy to. I'll be at Panera Bread from 7 to 8 in the morning, and Waynesboro Public Library from 8 to 9. So feel free to drop by and have a chat.
Thank you, Mr.
Thank you.
Freeman. All right, we'll move on. Item 4 is to hold a public hearing to receive comment on the city's proposed annual action plan for housing and community development projects budgeted for the 2017 program year. Mr. Juday, I think is.
That's correct.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of council. As you might remember from the last council meeting, I explained a little bit about what the CDBG program is and why it is that we're going through this process to determine our next round of projects. Just to quickly recap a couple things for anyone who missed that presentation, we're a CDBG entitlement community, which means we get an annual formula-based grant. This year it's $185,000. Again, in municipal terms, that's not a ton of money. You can't do any massive projects with it, but it helps with a number of small things. It has to benefit people in low to moderate income areas of the city. It can aid in the prevention and elimination of slums and blight if you have a designated area. Our designated area is downtown. And it can meet needs that have a particular urgency. Again, we've received public comment on that. The only public suggestion that we received dealt with the Waynesboro General's bathrooms, but that was outside of the LMI area, and so we're not able to use the funds for that project. The projects that we have proposed, just to recap, 20% can go towards personnel and administrative costs, and this is a particularly difficult grant to administer because it touches all 3 levels of government, has federal regulations around it, and then administered through the states. And then of the non-administrative expenditures, a max of 30% can go towards downtown projects, and 70% have to go towards low to moderate income neighborhoods. In the past, we've done quite a few different projects. This year, we're proposing to do several water and sewer projects on the east side of the city. Shenandoah Avenue, High Street area sewer projects that will hopefully stop some sewer backups that have been happening in that area and also help with our I&I obligations. A Hunter Street water project that will extend an 8-inch ductile main to replace a current 2-inch cast iron main, and that will hopefully help to be a small step towards improving water pressure on East Main Street, which has been a problem with development out there in the past. And then also a Malcolm Avenue water project that will again replace a 2-inch cast iron main with a 6-inch ductile main and help water flow up in the upper Basic City area. And then in the downtown area, we have about $45,000 to spend, and we'll be finishing off the Arch Avenue streetscape so that we connect the dots and replace the holes in the existing streetscape. And then also we're going to work on Bruce Alley South, which is right next to the Coiner House. If you know the current pedestrian mall is, it's right across the street from that is the alley next to Ann Arden Furniture. The water and sewer projects, and again, in the past, we've done a lot more housing renovation with the LMI grants. HUD has pushed localities to move away from that, and even our own Tom Carlson, who administers the grant, has said that he's found that to be a fairly inefficient use of the funds and often doesn't get you the return that you're looking for. And HUD is identifying more infrastructure projects as being the best leverage for their money in these LMI areas, and so we're following along with that. The water and sewer projects would benefit 190 households in that area. Again, as I said, the Hunter Avenue project will be a small step towards improving the water pressure along East Main. And we believe this will leverage the CDBG money most efficiently because we can do it all with our own work crews. And so we'll be able to primarily purchase just equipment and materials with it, which HUD likes a lot. And then for the downtown projects, we're closing the remaining gaps in our streetscape. Again, we have a couple of blocks that are very noticeable in that streetscape. And this will also improve the Bruce Alley pedestrian experience, we think, and align it with that pedestrian mall. So those are the proposed projects, but we're, again, open to any further feedback that we receive from council or the public. And here's a map of where those projects are located. Any questions?
Any questions, Mr. Juday?
One question I would have is, and I asked it last year, and so I guess I'll ask you again to reaffirm my understanding of the program, and that obviously think of improving blight in neighborhoods. You don't particularly think of water and sewer projects as the way to address blight, and I can appreciate that the inadequacy of $185,000 probably isn't going to get you a whole lot with affecting blight. But that said, I would, and maybe this is more of a statement than anything else. that assistance to overcome and influence and overcome some of the issues that exist in many of our neighborhoods, is that I think we go another year without really having a conversation about what are some public-private partnerships that could facilitate some of these changes. And I would hope that through our comprehensive plan effort here, it can help guide. And I would ask that maybe you share that with Mr. Carlson, is that maybe for next year we really start examining the use of those because really, I mean, water sewer project, yes, it is a benefit of the neighborhood, but it also benefits everybody here in the city. But it's not specifically addressing, I think, some of the underlying blight issues. So my question is that if we applied for the pool, we may walk away with 0. We're guaranteed 185, so that's why we do the 185 every year.
That's essentially correct, that prior to being designated an entitlement community, we sought and were successful in receiving community development block grants, and they tended to be of much larger value but more unevenly spaced. And then some of those are competitive grants, so you're putting your application against the grants in other communities. But that's certainly the choice that the council made at the time, was to say, rather than compete for and every few years receive $600,000, we would take 180 or so, 170, 180 each year as an entitlement.
Right.
If I could address the rest of your question as well, I think if you talk about what could be done in a lot of those LMI neighborhoods, there's individual housing renovation, which, as I said, HUD's trying to push away from, and we've even found it to be fairly inefficient use of the funds. And then there's kind of bread and butter infrastructure projects like this. And then there's also probably more visible infrastructure projects in the right-of-way and streetscaping and that type of thing. And we have discussed doing some stuff, in accordance with the comp plan discussion. We talked about projects could be done on East Main. The advice that we've received from Tom Carlson, who administers it, is that that's not really an appropriate use of the funds. So they really look for neighborhood benefit specifically. And so it would have to be a very targeted neighborhood project. But we could do, right now downtown is designated as our slums and blight area. We're going to be looking in the next year at maybe designating the East Main corridor as our slums and blight area. That would allow us to do more streetscaping over there and things like that. Part of the issue with this grant is just, like I said, it's difficult to administer, and it's monitored very closely by HUD. And so part of it's, we take the projects that we'd like to do, and we say these will be the easiest to get into this grant, and maybe we need to appropriate some other money for some of the stuff that would be more marginal for it.
Or potentially maybe even rolling the dice next year, again, guided by the comprehensive plan, and maybe exiting the entitlement and coming in with a specific project that could have a larger value for the community and the neighborhoods that would benefit from it.
Certainly look into that.
Yeah, I'm really not sure what the process for exiting is. I think when you enter, you're entering essentially in 5-year cycles. And I can't remember if next year is our 4th or 5th year.
Okay. It's our 4th. I think we'll have one more year of the entitlement, but after that,
okay,
we could look at doing a big a block grant. Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is a little unnerving, but at the same time, it would be interesting to look at similar sized communities, even maybe beyond Virginia, and outside of the entitlement program, and what sort of assistance are they receiving compared to that. I mean, obviously it's very safe, the 185, but it's difficult to get a lot of important stuff accomplished with it.
The other thing that I think we have to look at in the future is what projects are we trying to use it for? Because there's certain things that that they fit well into HUD's mission, and so it can do them fairly easily. But there's other things that it could have been a $100,000 greenway, and now it's a $600,000 greenway because we had to follow all these federal regulations and so forth. So yeah, we have to see which of those projects fits best into that.
Okay, that's all I had.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Thank you, Mr. Gay. I'll hereby open the public hearing.
No one has signed up to speak this evening.
All right, so I'll hereby close the public hearing. Is there a motion to adopt the resolution approving the 2017 annual action plan?
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Freeman. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Marks. Is there any other discussion? If not, all in favor of adopting the resolution, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carries 4-0. Item 5A is to conduct a public hearing to receive comment and consider introducing an ordinance amending Chapter 1, General Provisions, Section 1-13A and 1, Elections District, Voting Places of the Code of the City of Waynesboro, authorizing the relocation of the Ward A voting location from 133 North Delphine Avenue to 489 North Winchester Avenue. Mr. Ham.
Mayor Allen and members of council, Ms. Mary Alice Downs, Secretary of the Electoral Board, has informed the city clerk that it is necessary to relocate the polling place for Ward A. Representatives of the Second Presbyterian Church, the current Ward A polling place, have informed the Electoral Board that the church is no longer able to fulfill the responsibilities associated with hosting a polling location. The Electoral Board is responsible for identifying voting locations and has secured a commitment from Basic United Methodist Church at 489 North Winchester Avenue to serve as the Ward A polling place. By law, the City Council must conduct a public hearing on the proposed change and effect the change by ordinance. City Council is asked this evening to conduct a public hearing and introduce the ordinance establishing the Ward A polling place at 489 North Winchester Avenue.
Thank you, Mr. Hamp. Are there any questions, Mr. Hamp? If not, I'll hereby open the public hearing.
No one has signed up to speak.
I'll hereby close the public hearing. Is there a motion to introduce the ordinance?
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Freeman. Ordinances introduced this evening will be considered at the August 14th meeting of City Council. Item 6 is to receive a presentation of proposed revisions to the city's subdivision ordinances from Mr. Luke Juday, Director of Planning again.
Thank you again, Mayor's member of council. This project is the result of a lot of work that was done by my predecessor and a number of staff members this spring to re-examine our subdivision ordinance, and I'll explain some of the impetus behind it. Just for the benefit of everyone here, I know you all know this, but a subdivision is whenever we separate an existing lot into 2 or more lots. We have 2 types of subdivisions, major and minor. Major comes before you. That's any subdivision that involves an extension of public infrastructure or more than 5 lots. Minor subdivisions, usually just when somebody has a family lot and they want to split it in 2 or something, are handled by my office administratively. And then major subdivisions have a preliminary subdivision where you approve the overall plan and grant the entitlement to develop, and then a final plat where the developers completed the public improvements and then we give them their subdivision. And our subdivision ordinance is a chapter that governs all the procedures, the design standards, and the public improvement requirements that we require when we allow someone to subdivide land. Staff have been revisiting this along with the Planning Commission, working closely with them for a number of reasons. The big one is outdated design standards dealing with our roads, and I'll explain that in a little bit. But there's also some other problems, and that's why we just decided to do a complete revision and clean up a lot of the language, because there were some unclear review and approval procedures, some repetitive or redundant sections, and then also a few compliance issues with state and federal law, which, again, state law pretty closely governs subdivision ordinances. And this just happens over time. Ordinances slowly become more and more outdated, so it becomes worthwhile to revisit them. Kind of talk about 2 different types of changes. We have changes to the document that aren't a real they're not going to change what happens, what gets built on the ground. And then we have some other changes that are actual changes to the law that will affect what gets built. As far as the changes to the document, we've got a reordered table of contents that we think makes a little more logical sense. We have a new section for a period of validity of plats. It's been a big issue because when you approve a preliminary plat, it's valid for a certain number of years, and the state legislature continues to do arbitrary extensions of them justified by the recession, and so we've had to adjust our ordinance because of that. There hopefully clearer procedures, we think, for major and minor subdivisions. So it'll be easier for someone who's picking up the subdivision ordinance right away to see exactly the procedures that they should follow. Kind of what we found was that our ordinary procedure that as it's developed, which is well understood by developers that we work with day to day, isn't always understood as well by somebody who's just doing one subdivision or a small thing. And so we want it to be clear in the ordinance. We want it to be very obvious, and we put in some diagrams that will help them. And then we've moved a couple things. We used to have some site cover requirements about landscaping. Basically, they were sort of repetitive and in some cases contradictory with our zoning ordinance, and so we've tried to clarify anything in the public space is in the subdivision ordinance, anything on private land is in the zoning ordinance to make a clear delineation. So those are document changes. Another document change, our subdivision ordinance had in it quite a few places where it said city council may waive under these conditions. We've opted, or the Planning Commission, we discussed removing all of those, but that doesn't actually change the law. City Council can still waive any section of the subdivision ordinance, and you all should be aware of that. And developers will ask for waivers. But what happened is we had a couple sections where it said City Council may waive if, and it kind of created an expectation of a waiver, and that's sort of how we ended up with most of our neighborhoods not having sidewalks, as it became understood by the developers that they could get a waiver for this or that. And City Council's expressed more recently that they're not as interested in granting waivers for some of these things, and so we just thought, let's take that out of the document entirely. You all know you can grant a waiver if the situation arises, but that should be an extraordinary situation, not something that we've built into the ordinance. So that's the document changes. As far as the regulatory changes that will actually affect what you see getting built, the driving issue behind this has been street design, especially the street width. Currently, we have in our subdivision ordinance standards for street construction that require a minimum 36-foot curb-to-curb width for our streets. This is much wider than any of the localities around us, and it's also much wider than the current VDOT standard. And in talking with staff and developers in the community, what we found was that really the main thing that we care about is that we get VDOT maintenance money and that our streets conform to VDOT standards. Their smallest road width requirement is a 24-foot, and it varies based on the road type. So if it's an out-of-the-way residential street, it'd be 24-foot, and then it goes up as it becomes larger streets. But we require a minimum 36-foot everywhere. And if you go out and measure a 36-foot street somewhere in buried in a residential subdivision, you'll see that it feels abnormally large. And you can kind of feel that driving around certain of our neighborhoods. So I just wanted to explain 5 big reasons that we want to make this change and why that street width is a problem for us. The first one is just aesthetics. It is quantifiable that narrower streets produce higher property values and sort of more aesthetically pleasing areas. Here I stood on Oak Avenue and I looked first south of Summit Square and then north of Summit Square. South has a 24-foot section, which is what we'd be requiring under VDOT. North has our minimum 36. And you can see that the minimum 36 makes it harder for the tree cover to grow. It makes it, creates more of an exposed pavement feel. Whereas the narrower sections create, I think, a more aesthetically pleasing neighborhood street. The second big reason is safety. Again, going back here, people tend to drive very fast if you have a straight, wide road, and that's obviously not desirable in a neighborhood street. When you have a narrower road section, especially when you have cars parked on one side or on both sides, people naturally slow down, and you have, as a result, a lower incident rate, since higher speeds lead to more accidents. So that is, we feel, more appropriate for our residential streets. Second big cost, third big reason is just the cost of construction, the cost of maintenance. It's costly for developers, and so that cost, gets built in then to the cost of the homes in the subdivision. And we hear about it from the developers. And then the other big cost is our cost of maintenance. Again, we receive VDOT money on a lane mile basis. So this right here is 2 lane miles, 1 lane going that way, 1 lane coming back. And they don't factor in the width of the road at all. And so if you have a 24-foot section that's 2 lanes and a 36-foot section that's 2 lanes, we're getting the same amount of maintenance money, but we have 50% more pavement, more square footage of pavement to pour over that area. And so it's costlier for us. And that's one of the reasons that it's difficult to stretch our VDOT maintenance money, is we have so much extra square footage for each lane mile that we have of road. And then the last reason is the environmental cost. Involves, the more impervious surface that you have, the more you have flooding and stormwater issues, and that again, goes back to our cost now under the Chesapeake Bay Act. So those are the reasons why street width is an issue and why we think that we ought to change the ordinance. And what we've done in the past, and kind of what we looked at here, is that VDOT has their engineers and their standards that are evolving over time, and they have obviously a lot more research power than we do here. And then we consider their standards every now and then change our ordinance to reflect their standards. We felt that that was a little inefficient. We opted, rather than creating a new standard, to just reference the VDOT standard and say all streets built in the city of Waynesboro must be a VDOT-approved, VDOT standard road. And so that'll allow the standards to change along with kind of current practice in planning, and also ensure that any road that's built in the city of Waynesboro gets us lane mile maintenance money, which is our main concern. Another big change to the street design, actually this isn't a big change in the ordinance, it's just a guiding section at the beginning about street layout. But I do think it's important to bring up and mention, currently our street layout section says that part of the purpose of the street layout should be to reduce traffic through certain areas. We believe that, consistent with current planning practice, it should encourage interconnectivity in the ordinance. And this is kind of a private good, public good trade-off, because we always hear from the neighborhood and the developer about wanting to reduce the through traffic as much as possible. And we feel as the planning department that our job is to advocate for the public good on the other side, and that our ordinance should advocate for interconnectivity. And that's important because the more interconnected your roads are, the more pedestrian friendly they are, and the more that they allow for rapid travel if you're walking. It's very noticeable how difficult it is to walk very far if you have a more of a disconnected road system. It's also important for traffic distribution purposes. When you have high interconnectivity, it distributes traffic more evenly across the system. When you have a low interconnectivity system, what you get is all the traffic gets concentrated, pushed off of the various roads and concentrated onto large arterials. And then those arterials kind of, not only do the routes become longer, so people are actually driving more miles, but then those arterials become massive and choked. So that's kind of how 29 in Charlottesville became that way, is there's no interconnectivity. That's the only north-south route. And so it kind of gets wider and wider and wider until it's unmanageable and unsightly and, all those things. And that's important to us because we've had a lot of discussion in the comp plan about what people love about Waynesboro, and one of the things that they love is the small town feel. And part of the small town feel is the interconnected streets. It's the distributed traffic. It's the smaller junctions rather than having kind of giant arterials. So again, it's not a major change to the ordinance. It's just a guiding section. Doesn't have any real teeth, but I think it's an important justification to have in there. And then we have had in the past a sidewalk ordinance that was consistently waived, and as a result we're missing sidewalks in a lot of areas, and we hear frequently from people who would like there to be sidewalk construction in those areas. That becomes very expensive for us later. And so we have changed the sidewalk ordinance to require sidewalks on both sides of all new streets, and you can see that, you'll be able to see that happening in some of our newer subdivisions. And we've also created an exception in the ordinance that allows developers, essentially allows us to bargain with developers, as has been done in the past, but this makes it more explicit in the ordinance, where their sidewalks can be waived in favor of shared use paths that could extend a greenway system. For instance, this one along the new Berkmar Road in Charlottesville. And then lastly, under street design, we've had a lot of discussion recently about private streets, especially in the Ladd School development. And the strong feeling from Planning Commission was that they just wanted to outrightly ban private streets. And again, that can be waived by City Council, but they felt that private streets simply shouldn't be allowed. And the comment we had from one planning commissioner who has a lot of experience in local government down in Southwest Virginia was that you have a developer that says, well, I don't want to build to your standard, I'll just make it a private street, the homeowners association will take care of it. And so they construct the street, and then the first snowfall comes, and suddenly you have 50 residents in this room saying, why wasn't my street plowed? And you try to explain, well, your home was slightly cheaper because the developer didn't follow ordinance and created the maintenance under the HOA, and that doesn't really work. The city will inevitably accept the road and plow it, and we're not getting maintenance money for it, and so forth. So we just felt it was better to just say no private streets, and if there's an extraordinary circumstance, then that can be waived. And then there's a few other regulatory changes that don't deal with streets. mostly fairly minor. One of them allows us to verify the current tax status of a property before approving a subdivision. So if you have somebody that hasn't paid back taxes, they shouldn't be able to subdivide the property then. And that creates a lot of legal hassles because then you have to figure out how much each of the subdivided properties is liable for the previous property's tax lien. And we've just clarified the language around amendments to approve preliminary plats, clarified that if you get a preliminary plat approved by Planning Commission and City Council, you know, it's a big public process, then you come back in and you want to change a bunch of things, that has to go back to the same process. Unless it only changes minor things that were not mentioned, not brought up during that process, or that don't increase density, or that don't affect the road layout. And then we also changed the ordinance around public utilities. Essentially, every area of the city now is covered by water and sewer mains, almost all of it that's really subdividable. And so we currently have in our ordinance that you have to have, it's a little complicated. If you have to have 30,000 square feet at least if there's no public utilities, and 7,500 square feet if you have either water or sewer but not both, in addition to a secondary catchment area. And we just felt the language was confusing, and almost all areas of the city are covered by these mains, and we think that you know, if you're going to have a major subdivision, they ought to extend those mains. And so we're just saying that you have to have public utilities if you're subdividing into lots that are less than 30,000 square feet, which is about 4/5 of an acre or 3/4 of an acre. And then a few other changes from Public Works. One of them is requiring public easements to be recorded before private easements on a plat. What happens to us is that we'll approve a plat, and then the private utilities, the private companies will come in and try to record all their easements quickly before we can record ours. So then theirs take precedence over ours on the deed, and so if we have to put in a water main crossing a power easement, then they get to reject that or approve it because their easement was recorded first. So now we're just saying public easements have to be recorded before private easements. And a lot of other localities have done the same. As far as the process, we were receiving comment and working on the draft. As I said, my predecessor did some preliminary research for it, and then we cleaned it up a lot after I arrived. And then we've gone through work sessions and public hearings with the Planning Commission, and so they've had quite a bit of input and guided that process. And now we're in the public review and comment period. We will not have a public hearing tonight, but we will have one in a couple weeks if you all would like to move ahead with this. But just wanted to introduce and kind of fully inform you on our logic behind it, why we're going about the revision. And then hopefully, if you all like the arguments I've made, then we'll hopefully adopt the ordinance and move forward. And we've had a ton of support from all levels of staff: engineering, fire, planning, and zoning have all been very much in favor of updating these street requirements. All of our development community has been very much in favor of it, and all the citizens that we've consulted have also said that they would prefer the new street standards as well. So we haven't had any constituency so far come out against it, but obviously we always could. So, any questions about the subdivision ordinance? I'm happy to answer them. Or
Any questions?
I have a question. You just now mentioned fire department.
Mm-hmm.
They don't have a problem with thinner streets?
They need them to be at a certain level, yeah, because they need to be able to get their fire trucks in. But again, hopefully the interconnectivity issue, which they're very big on as well and are pushing, allows them to take multiple routes into an area. And the 24-foot section still allows a fire truck to get through fairly easily.
Okay, and the schools, as far as their bus routes, they have to have a different philosophy, usually smaller.
Not to my knowledge, no. We should
Have
be
they
able to
been
accommodate a school bus still, but no, I haven't asked. I'll check with them though.
Okay. So,
That it?
Yep.
All right, thank you, Mr. Jude.
Problem. Thank you.
Mayor, I would just like to say, I'm certainly impressed with the work and effort that's gone behind this. I don't know if I understand it all tonight, but obviously dealing with some technical issues, but ones that are important, and sounds like people that will be most affected by this are pretty much on board, which should make adoption, if we see fit to do it, a little easier.
Thank you.
I'd say too, I certainly don't want to cloud this process. So I would echo that. I mean, this is definitely a lot of really hard work that's gone into it, and folks should be commended for it. I think it'd be. I attended a conference last week and spoke with some folks about Virginia Code and proffers. And as you may or may not be aware, City of Waynesboro doesn't have a proffer ordinance. And so as a new subdivision comes online, there are techniques in which you can assess the impact and additional services that would need to be provided as a consequence to that. Now, whether that's a set aside for short of it is that for every parcel, there's a prescribed amount that's calculated and formulated to get approval for that subdivision. You could get anywhere from $4,000 or $5,000 per lot, and that cost is then carried over into the cost of the home when the builder goes to sell it. And so then those funds can then go and support things like school renovations or additions or capital costs such as additional fire protection or police protection that's required as a result of it. So I would enjoy, we could talk about it at a later date, but just kind of throw that out there. I think that would be a really another important thing for us to consider over this calendar year at some point.
Any comments? Okay. We'll move to item 7A, is to receive a report from City Manager concerning the establishment of the Treasurer's Office as a passport acceptance facility.
Yes, sir. Mr. Mayor, members of council, this item also is for information purposes this evening. You will not be requested to take action. As you may know, that passports are necessary for international travel, and they're actually issued by the United States Department of State. Citizens may make application for passports at a variety of federal, state, and local government agencies or offices. The process by which applications are processed are authorized by or established. Those processes are established by the the Code of Virginia and the Department of State. When a citizen makes application, two separate fees are collected. The fee for the passport is collected and transmitted with the application documents to the Department of State. The Passport Application Acceptance Facility is authorized to charge an application acceptance fee of $25 and administrative fees necessary for processing the application, such as photocopies, postage, etc. That authorization comes by virtue of Virginia law. Some state and local agencies are required to remit the entire application acceptance fee to the Commonwealth, while others, it is believed, may retain locally all or a portion of the application acceptance fee. In recent years, the number of citizens applying for passports has increased appreciably, prompting some offices to elect to cease providing application acceptance services, which are ancillary to those responsibilities and service obligations established by the Code. Depending on how well informed and prepared an applicant is, the passport application process may involve several staff encounters requiring between 15 to 20 minutes in total. Passport application acceptance facilities may not limit application acceptance from residents of their jurisdiction. Consequently, services provided to any resident making application. Applicants from other local jurisdictions regularly choose facilities based on geographic convenience or opportunities for more prompt service. Our city treasurer, Ms. Stephanie Beveridge, intends to offer passport application services by appointment beginning August 7th of this year, and proposes to enter into an agreement with our municipal organization whereby the locality would retain a portion of the acceptance fee, with the balance being remitted to the Commonwealth as may be required by Virginia law. The treasurer is presently seeking to clarify whether treasurers are obligated to remit all or a portion of the application acceptance fee to the Commonwealth, and that determination will inform the revenue sharing provision of the proposed agreement. It is recommended that a portion of the fee retained locally will be applied to support the material and supply expenses to support the service and possibly personnel expenses associated with the service. At this time, the council is simply advised of the treasurer's intention to provide passport application acceptance services, establishing her office as an acceptance facility. Upon clarification of the acceptance facility disposition, the city manager and the treasurer will present a proposed agreement for consideration by the council. And I think it's worth noting that, and important to note, that the treasurer has the authority to elect to deliver this service irrespective of any agreement with locality. An agreement as contemplated would be mutually beneficial for the treasurer and the locality. So Ms. Beveridge is present this evening. If you have any questions about what she intends to do, or if you have questions for me, we're happy to answer them. Other than that, I would anticipate that she and I will be back before the council in the near future with a proposed agreement.
Ms. Beveridge, is there anything you'd like to come up and say to us tonight?
No, I think the city manager did a wonderful job.
Thank you. Is there any questions of Mr. Hamp?
Would we be able to put underneath people's passport photos, visit Waynesboro underneath it? That'd be awesome.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Hamp.
You're welcome.
Item 8A is to consider approving an application from the Executive Director of the Shenandoah Valley Art Center for street closures, amplified sound, the sale of and consumption of alcohol beverages on public property in association with the 2017 Virginia Fall Foliage Art Festival to be conducted October the 14th and 15th. Mr. Hamp.
Mayor Allen and members of council, this is our signature event, and we're fortunate to have the Art Center conduct it. The plan for the logistics are the same as in last or previous years, including last year, in terms of which road closures are requested and where the food and alcohol service area will be established. Unless you have questions, I would present the request as submitted.
Is there any way we can guarantee that it'd be sunshine that weekend and no rain? It seems like the only problem we really ever have with it.
Right. No, I can't offer that guarantee, sir.
All right, is there a motion to approve the requested street closures and to authorize the sound, the sale, and the consumption of alcohol on public property?
So moved.
All right, thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Freeman. All in favor, or is any other discussion? If not, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carries 4-0. Item 8B is to consider approving a request by the Department of Parks and Recreation to serve alcohol beverages on city-owned property in association with the Tour de Valley cycling event on September the 2nd. Mr. Hamp.
This event is I think this was the fourth such Tour de Valley that the Parks and Recreation Department will conduct. As with the previous application, this is the same plan as was applied in previous years. The beverage alcohol piece comes at the conclusion of the ride at the Ridgeview Park, where there's a concluding event social at the pool area, and the department, as in the past, is committed to following the alcohol beverage control rules and regulations. And so unless there are questions, I don't think it requires further elaboration.
We haven't had any problems with any of these events in the past, have we?
No,
that
sir.
I'm aware of, and I see that you.
Not associated at
back there
the
saying
end.
that.
I think.
All right, great. All right, are there any questions? If not, is there a motion to authorize the consumption of beverage alcohol on city-owned property in association with the Tour de Valley cycling event?
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Freeman. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Marks. Any discussion? If not, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carries 4-0. Item 9 is to consider reappointing a representative to the Shenandoah Valley Regional Airport Commission for a 3-year term ending August the 31st, 2020.
Mr. Jeffrey Ward has served on the commission representing Waynesboro since 2001 and was recently appointed vice chairman. He is eligible for and expressed his willingness to continue service on the commission.
Is there a motion to appoint Mr. Ward?
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Freeman. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Marks. Any discussion? If not, all in favor of reappointing Mr. Ward, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carries 4-0. Item 9B is to consider reappointing a representative to the Cultural Commission for a 4-year term expiring August the 31st, 2021.
Mr. Doherty currently serves on the commission as reflected by reappointment status. The chair of the commission recommends Mr. Doherty for reappointment.
Is there a motion to reappoint him for the term expiring August the 31st, 2001?
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Marks. Is there a second?
Second.
Any other discussion? If not, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carries 4-0. Item 6 is to consider reappointing 2 members to the Historical Commission, each to a 4-year term ending August the 31st, 2021. Mr. Ham.
Ms. Judith Price Smith and Ms. Judy Walden express willingness to serve. The chair of the commission supports these reappointments.
Is there a motion to appoint Ms. Smith and Ms. Walden to the commission expiring August the 31st, 2021?
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Short. Second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Freeman. Any discussion? If not, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carries 4-0. Item 9D is to consider reappointing Mr. Samuel Insana and Mrs. Carolyn Clark to the Shenandoah Valley Workforce Development Board, each for a 4-year term ending August the 31st, 2021. Mr. Hamp.
I think you said it all, sir.
All right, any questions? If not, there's a motion to reappoint these 2 people to the Workforce Development Board for 4-year terms expiring August the 31st, 2021.
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Freeman. Is there a second?
A second.
Thank you, Mr. Short. Any other discussion? If not, all in favor of reappointing these 2, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carries 4-0. Item 10 is to consider introducing an ordinance appropriating $2,285 in permit fees collected in association with the Dooms Volunteer Fire Company Carnival held at Constitution Park to the general fund for a donation to the Dooms Volunteer Fire Company. Mr. Shaw.
Mr. Mayor, members of council, it's a long-standing tradition that the Dooms Volunteer Fire Company holds a fundraising carnival in Constitution Park here in Waynesboro, and it's worth noting that the Dooms Volunteer Fire Company is the city's closest and most frequently called upon mutual aid fire company. They provide services both here in Waynesboro and East Augusta County. In past years, City Council has refunded the permit fees that go into the inspection of carnival equipment, and staff would recommend that you do likewise this year.
Thank you. Is there questions or concern concerning the ordinance? If not, is there a motion to introduce?
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Short. Item 11 is communications and correspondence.
I don't have anything this evening, sir.
Item 12 is citizens' comment period.
Mr. Bob Browning.
Mr. Browning, if you'll give us your name and address, please, and watch the light timer over here, and when it gets to red, please finish if you haven't at that time. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Good evening. My name is Bob Browning, and I live at 421 Chickapin Drive. I am retired and a Waynesboro native, and I am also a volunteer as a vice president of the Waynesboro Heritage Foundation. On the east wall of your adjacent conference room, you will find a framed document, which is a petition of local citizens requesting town designation from the General Assembly in 1800. The framed document was due to the efforts of Julia Bortles and Shirley Bridgeforth. Tonight, I'm going to speak to you about governing using best management practices. Currently, you have a large educational capital facilities project in the plan, design, and develop specification stages of this project. Best management practices dictate that the owners or citizens of Waynesboro be briefed on the current status of this project. This is a best project management practice, and that certain issues will pop up at this time in which the project team could solve easily versus later in the project. Examples include traffic and parking management, sufficient space for special education in the arts, and the elimination or demolition of the historic Plum House along with its local historic significance. These items are currently in the local rumor mill. whether you've heard it or not. It's out there, and I've been questioned a bunch on those items. So with that in mind, I'm going to say, please tell me now. Tell me whether, as planned, the Plum House will be demolished or changed as part of the renovation of Waynesboro High School's project. Thanks for your time. The rumor is out there, gentlemen.
It's the first time I've heard it. Thank you.
I was afraid of that. That's why.
Well, to be, I don't know, this is a little off, but to bring clarity to this, that is not the truth. So for those, if you're watching on YouTube or online, that is not truth. That's not accurate at all.
The demolition's not accurate. What's not accurate?
Not touching the Plum House at all.
Not touching the Plum House.
It's not going to happen, is what he's telling you.
Yeah, the Plum House is staying where it's at.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Ms. Jeannie McCutcheon.
Ms. McCutcheons, if you'll give us your name and address, please.
Jeannie McCutcheon, 1922 East Main Street, but I'm talking to you today from 267 Port Republic Road. The reason why I'm here tonight is the impact on Port Republic Road with the closing of the Florence Avenue Bridge. We have been here already before and made you aware of the safety conditions of the Port Republic Road area because of the railroad crossing. Emergency can't go across it if the train is coming, or up Florence Avenue because the bridge is closed. We've also told you, neighbors have told you and spoke to you about speeding and the increase of traffic. And also a child almost got hit there. There is a small sign down at the bottom of the hill and towards the top of the hill that says 15 miles an hour. And we are pleased that the policemen have been there doing some monitoring to give tickets or warning. We really don't want that to have to happen. We really don't want that neighborhood to be, don't go to Port Republic Road, which happens to be a historic district, because the policemen are going to be there. I think we need to do some more research, because I'm sure the people who come from Florence Avenue onto that street are used to traveling at least 25 or 35 miles an hour, and I'm sure Port Republic Road is probably one of the only or least areas that have a 15-mile limit, okay? I'm going to give you an example. They come from Florence Avenue onto Beta Street. Are you familiar with that? And when they turn right to go down Port Republic Road, there is not a sign until they get to the bottom of the hill. Well, they've traveled 30 miles an hour getting down the hill. So I think something needs to be done to make people aware who's coming from the other areas of Florence Avenue to get onto Port Republic Road, to get out to Broad Street, to make them aware so maybe they won't have to have the police. We don't really want to have the police have to do tickets, but we do have to do it for that reason. And I understand they were trying to warn them, but it didn't seem to work. So they're now giving people a ticket. And then that makes our neighborhood, people not wanting to come there. And that's not really what we want. Also, you have moved the traffic from Florence Avenue, and I'm glad to hear about the road, because you have moved the traffic from a roadway that has a width of between 35 feet to 36 feet in width. Cars can park on both sides of the roads and traffic can go both ways without any problem. To the Port Republic Road, which is 20 to 21 feet. Cars are parked on the right side going up the hill. We have to ride the downhill. So we use one lane, have about 10 feet of lane to use going either up or down, okay? Something needs to be done. More study or more research, since this traffic has to impact on this area, and it is. I just want to bring to your attention at 260 Port Republic Road, there's an apartment complex. Years ago, the people that lived there, most of them didn't have a car. I noticed that either a new owner or maybe the same owner, that they have remodeled that building by painting it, putting steps up, and doing something to the interior, and it looks rather nice, and I'm glad about that. But we see there at least 9 vehicles. When I say vehicles, they are trucks and cars, parked from Minden Place all the way up to that address, even to the house next to it, because those people park in their yard. And there happens to be 2 cars, and I'm going to refer to that to the police officer, captain, tonight, that has been there for 3 months. One is an antique car, and I'm sure it probably belongs to one of them, and they have nowhere to park it. That apartment building also has...
Ms. McCutcheon, thank you. Your time's over.
Okay.
Thank you.
I just wanted to say, I wish you'd look at it, because it is a problem for us on Port Republic Road. Thank you.
We've got our chief of police sitting right back there, and I'm sure he heard every word you said, so thank you. Anyone else? Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
All right, we're adjourned.